Monday, July 9, 2012. This is Mercedes Diesel Guy, and this is my 1995 Subaru Legacy project car. I had to pop off this tie rod yesterday in order to change out the steering rack boot. And if you do a search, I actually do have a video where I do explain how to replace those. And it didn't make sense to redo that video. But anyhow, I had to pop off the outer tie rod end in order to get the new steering rack boot on, and I noticed that there was a tear here in the ball joint boot. Now, I believe I can replace this boot separately, but for the most part, you know, when you have damage like that, you really should just replace the whole tie rod end. So I have some on order. They should be here in a couple of days, and then I'm going to replace that. And if you're doing this at home, one way you can preserve your alignment settings when doing something like the steering rack boots is to count the number of threads here on the bolt. I mean, on the inner tie rod. And once you loosen the jam nut, make sure you put the outer tie rod and the jam nut back exactly where they were before. And I've done that in the past and driven probably, you know, tens of thousands of miles with no real tire wear. So, and I believe this adjusts the toe setting. So, I mean, you really should get an alignment, but this is one way to preserve your alignment settings if you're just taking these off, and I've had good luck doing that. No guarantees, but it usually does work pretty well. But anyhow, this is the sort of damage you should look for. Like I said, I didn't notice any play, and it's, and I can move it around by hand, but it certainly doesn't seem like it's completely dead. But maybe it is. I don't know. The nut here does seem to be spinning the shaft. Another thing I've noticed on the outer tie rod ends here, a lot of the ones I've worked with in the past have a castle nut here on the top and a hole through the stud here. And once you have the castle nut cinched down to the proper torque, you put a cotter pin through the castle nut and the hole in the stud. And when I took off the nut here, I was kind of surprised to see there was no hole, and this was just a kind of a nylock fastener. So I thought that was kind of interesting there. This, and I looked at some of the aftermarket parts available, and it looks like some of them are like this. But for peace of mind, I do prefer the ones with the castle nut and the cotter pin. So this is just one thing to look out for, and they're not hard to replace. To remove the outer tie rod end, if you need to do that, the first thing you have to do is remove the cotter pin, and then you unthread the nut, whether it be a nylock fastener like this or the castle nut, but part way, only enough to cover the threads in the stud all the way. And then you use a tie rod end puller, kind of slip it over the sorry about the lighting here, no, it's not great. Slip it over the steering knuckle and tighten the bolt down here by hand until it makes contact with that nut. And then use a wrench to tighten this further, and it'll pop the tie rod right out of the steering knuckle. And the advantage of doing it that way, as opposed to using a pickle fork on the bottom, is that if you want to reuse the outer tie rod end, a pickle fork can damage the spoot, and then you may be forced to replace the part anyway. So, you know, these are not too expensive. I highly recommend having one in your toolbox. So, once you have it out, like I said, you count the number of threads. Be absolutely sure on that. Double count, triple count if you have to. Then you loosen the jam nut here, and you can, in order to get counter pressure, you can actually there's some flats here on the outer tie rod end, and you can grab that with a wrench. So you grab that, hold it, loosen your jam nut here, And then the outer tie rod is just on threads. And installation is reverse of removal. And like I said, make sure you put this back exactly to where you had counted. And if you're not sure about that, I highly recommend taking the car in for an alignment. So that's all. I hope this was informative, and have a good one. Thanks for watching.